Since 2016, the hardcore Brexit zealots have been the ones throwing their weight around in the room, very much backed up and boistered by their Brexit win in the referendum. And since then, they have pushed everything they can at speed. Hence why we've often seen them, whenever we've covered their Brexit up or their they're annoyed by Brexit. It's the fact that things are not progressing at speed. They want to try and push us as far away as possible so that there is no hope of returning at all. But that has not happened. Because go back to what really is the real cause between the real reason for Brexit. It's about regulations. Because there is a section in the Conservative Party that are essentially free market libertarianism. And that is not a popular ideology, even amongst conservatives. But they manage to sort of, bring a couple of people over every so often. But they're a small yet powerful, influential group, hence the ERG group and even the Bruges group. So they've thrown their power around for quite some time. But their peak was at Liz Truss and installing Liz Truss. And then, of course, what happened? Complete nosedived into the ground. So there's a lot of people speculating that maybe that's it. They've blown their chance. And that many MPs who maybe would have propped them up and supported them maybe haven't began to do that. Hence why we've heard the terms of a Swiss-style deal put forward very tentatively by the government. Because ever since Rishi Sunak came in as Prime Minister, we have seen very much so a softening of stance towards this. Whereas under Boris Johnson and even Liz Truss, any form of negotiation was seen as capitulation to Europe. And what have we got at the moment? Very successful negotiations going on in Northern Ireland. Again, it's not going to solve the problem completely, but the fact that there are negotiations going on and we are hearing very positive noises about these negotiations is a good thing. So we're making steps slowly but surely in the right direction. But of course, as we've been hearing very recently, the Brexiteers got really, really upset very recently when they even heard the distinct version that there may be heresy going on in the government. But what is really giving way is what was always bound to happen. When Brexit meets reality, reality would always win. And there are far more realists in the Conservative Party than there are Brexit fancyists, shall we say, fantasiists. And this could be what is going on. Hence why Rishi Sunak may very well be making very slowly but surely tiptoeing steps towards the EU. Hence why that announcement may have been linked on purpose to see how much of a pushback he might get if they did these talks. So let's go into a little bit more analysis that's been released about this. But like I say, this is something we will have to keep an eye on going forward. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So over we go to The Guardian today on this, with The Guardian view on Brexit heresy in the government. Reality begins to bite. The short, disastrous premiership of Liz Truss is beginning to look like the endpoint of a political trajectory that began with Brexit referendum back in 2016. The spectacular detonation of Kirsty Kretang's mini-budget by the unimpressed markets was the moment when ideology met reality, and the Conservative Party's sovereigntist delusions were finally tested to destruction. In its aftermath, the high tide of Brexit has gone out, and the slow voyage back to economic sanity at last appears to be underway. On Monday, Mrs Truss's successor, Rishi Sunak, was obliged to spend much of his visit to the CBI conference in Birmingham denying suggestions that the government was hoping to pivot to a closer Swiss-style relationship with the European Union. Switzerland enjoys significant and profitable access to the single market and participates in the EU research and education programs while making payments to the EU and aligning with its law. According to the Sunday Times report, government figures have privately discussed the possibility of such a relationship for Britain. But let me be unequivocal about this, Mr Sunak countered robustly. Under my leadership, the United Kingdom will not pursue any relationship with Europe that relies on alignment with EU laws. I voted for Brexit, I believe in Brexit, and I know that Brexit can deliver. There was no reason to doubt the Prime Minister's words on this. Already, he's already very vulnerable, and as he embarks on a programme of tax rises, Mr Sunak knows that the hardline Brexiteers in the Tory party, the enthusiastically assisted by the Daily Mail, would attempt to bring him down rather than even countenance such a betrayal. When Theresa May floated something very similar at the beginning of the end of her premiership, the European Research Group moved against her and Boris Johnson seized his chance. Nor are the grounds for thinking that the Brussels would even play ball with that amounts to reheated cakeism. As the damage done by Brexit to the British economy plays itself out, the EU has no reason to even revisit its position that Britain cannot enjoy the aspects of the single market which appeal to it while rejecting those that don't, such as the free movement of people. There will be no Swiss-style accommodation with the EU under the present government. But the fact that many influential figures in Mr Sunak's government felt to be able to brief such heresies to the press is something important. And that's what we've got to really try and get in. This is a huge step forward for us in the right direction. The fact that they felt brave enough to brief the press on this is a massive step forward because, as they said there, Liz Truss's complete implosion into this economic fantasy world has now ended, and we are now sailing back to possibly some sort of economic reality, is a good direction for us to be going in. But, of course, now we get back to the polls. So, according to the polls, the number of Britons who believe it was a mistake to leave the EU now stands at 56%, compared with just 32% who stand by the decision. Releasing its economic forecast before last week's autumn statement, after previously being sidelined by Mr Katang, the Office for Budget Responsibility stated boldly that Brexit had delivered a significant adverse impact on trade, and the public is also noticing that Britain is the only G7 country to have a smaller economy compared before the pandemic. And with its worst growth rate, the flagship post-Brexit trade deal with Australia was, quote, not actually very good, according to the former Environmental Secretary George Eustice. So as you can see, just this week alone, the tide is already turning. I mean, even George Eustice must be considered an absolute heretic at this point within the Brexit cause. He has gone out and actually rubbished a Brexit trade deal. And I can trust you this, if Liz Truss was in that room where he was saying that, she would have literally been burning a hole in the back of his head with the stare she must have been giving him. That would have been certainly for sure if she'd been in the room. But back onto it. The public's take on these very cumulative pieces of bad news, delivered as the country prepares for a record fall in living standards and a prolonged recession, is coalescing into a new common sense. The hard Brexit that Mr Johnson orchestrated, on which Mrs Truss attempted to double down, has palpably failed. For Sunak, the leader of an ungovernable, divided party, is, as he surely knows, it's too late to rescue the situation. But for Keir Starmer, Labour, the Swiss speculation is another sign that an opportunity is opening up. And that is it. You know, any moves that Starmer makes about forging a close relationship with the EU is a step in the right direction. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Swiss-style deal. Even maybe rejoining sort of the European Economic Area and regaining access to sort of the single market, accepting alignment is going to be actually an easier sell, especially with the fact that when you look at the predicted numbers, the Tories are going to take an absolute kicking potentially at the next general election, as we've seen before, coming back with only potentially just in some cases, just 100 seats. That is an absolute total wipeout, with many of the hardcore Brexiteers being booted from Parliament potentially. And with that amount of majority, it gives Keir Starmer a very big room to maneuver on this subject and maybe even actually have a proper conversation about the economy, which includes Brexit and how we sort of lessen these impacts. And of course, as we've said, when you start to have this conversation, it always comes back to, well, actually, leaving sort of the EU and the single market has had consequences. So should we rejoin these institutions? And ultimately, the question is yes, we should. So, as we always said, sooner or later, this would just be a path back. So while Sunak cannot pursue this because his party is so divided, he would get taken out in a week if he were to dare even suggest doing such a thing. The opportunity for Keir Starmer is there. And the very fact that Downing Street felt that it could brief the press on this to test the water is even more interesting, because the civil war post a conservative defeat is going to be very interesting to watch, because you are going to see a faction rise that was based on all those conservative, Remain, stars and politicians rise up and go, Brexit was wrong. They led the party in the wrong direction. Time to restore some economic sense. And that is going to be fascinating to watch. Fascinating to watch indeed, because we're going to see one almighty fight. Oh boy, are we going to see one. But yeah. So we'll get that to when that comes, but that's, well, maybe at least a year, maybe two away from the time being. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please don't remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. And of course, we'll see you all very soon for the next one. We'll see you soon.